Welcome to Voices,
a podcast from the Institute for Human Rights and Business.
Here, we're seeking to elevate the range of perspectives
on the role of business in the world
and in people's everyday lives.
Hello, everybody. This is Salil Tripathi from the Institute for Human Rights and Business, and I'm here today with Jason Ng. Jason is a lawyer and a human rights activist, and he's based in Hong Kong, where he has himself a personal, colorful story to tell about what happened to him. But we are going to talk today here in Bergen, where we met at the Literature Festival, about the situation in Hong Kong and what it means for free speech within a corporation. So first of all, thank you for joining us, Jason.
Thank you for having me, Salil.
Yeah. So my first question is this, that should an employee have complete freedom to say what he or she wants, especially on matters that have nothing to do with the corporation?
Right. This is the kind of issues that every company around the world is trying to grapple with, as are social media platforms, right? I mean, we have seen sort of high-profile stories about whether Facebook or Twitter should censor posts.
But those are not employees. What I'm talking about is if you're an employee. Because Facebook or Twitter can turn around and say that, yes, this is a public space, but this is our space and we set the rules.
Right. Well, obviously, freedom of expression is important and it is arguably one of the most important rights. But at the same time, it's not without limits, right? So obviously, if we have a situation where an employee makes comments that infringes the rights of another human being or another groups of human beings, that becomes problematic. The critical issue here is it's impossible to draw a line, and that explains why companies are really struggling with putting pen to pencil to craft a bulletproof or watertight policy that works in all situations. And so my advice to companies would be that they need to set up a committee to deal with a situation like this on a case-by-case basis and really look at the facts.
Who should be in that committee? Should it be workers from the company? Should it be human rights experts? Should it be free speech experts who are not in the company?
Right. Ideally, I mean, obviously, the makeup of the committee is limited by resources and whatnot, but ideally it should represent a cross-section of the organization itself, plus experts that they hire to sit on the committee who bring an independent but at the same time well-informed voice into the committee.
Now, you thought about it because you yourself had an experience you went through. Just tell us a little bit about what happened.
Right. So I have been a long-standing supporter of the protest movement in Hong Kong, which really coalesced in 2014 with the Umbrella Movement, and then it sort of came back last year in June with the anti-extradition protest movement. And it is not sort of anything new that I am an open supporter of that campaign, and I make frequent social media posts.
And you've written books in the past about protest movement.
Yeah,
you are a corporate lawyer, but you've also done that work.
Yes, I've written the first book available in English about the Umbrella Movement. So I make no secret about my political views. What happened was that last September, I became the target of a relentless doxing and cyberbullying campaign on the mainland. And that's sort
because of your activism.
Because of a Facebook post that where I discussed the protest movement in Hong Kong, how protesters are often matched by counter-protesters, possibly hired by the Chinese government to sort of silence the other side. And that post got taken out of context and sort of reframed into an anti-China, even racist accusation against me personally. And it sort of rose to the level that it was picked up by the state media in China, as well as by some of the bank regulators in China. And as you know, I used to work for a bank, so that created a lot of dicey situation between me and my employer.
And what happened after that?
Right. So after, I mean, the whole thing happened really quickly. I mean, we're talking about 48 hours. It became clear to me that I can no longer juggle both my activism work on the side as well as my day job. And so my employer and I decided to part ways.
So what should the employer have done in this kind of a context in a theoretical setting? Suppose it was not you, but what would your advice be? Because in theory, this is a Western bank we are talking about, I know that. A lot of Western banks do support, for example, gay rights activism, or,
Right.
Goldman Sachs, for example, does paint itself in rainbow colors and so on.
Right.
And you could have a situation where somebody wants to speak out on an issue.
Yeah.
What should a bank do? To what extent can it permit it? If there is somebody who wants to try to talk about women's rights in Saudi Arabia, for
Right.
example, here in Norway they would say it's a great idea, but over there it's a problematic thing.
Yeah.
So what would be your 3 or 4 recommendations to organizations like that?
Well, the same issue had happened to many other companies in
Right.
Hong Kong, like Cathay Pacific,
Yeah.
and even outside of Hong Kong, it happened to the NBA. I mean, there was the
Yes.
very similar issue that happened almost within the same week of my incident. My advice to companies like Cathay Pacific and NBA is really look at the facts. Don't rush to judgment. Don't necessarily make it a political issue. You have to take sides. Am I pro-China or am I anti-China? I think that tends to be the trap. Company management immediately felt that this is a political issue. But maybe what they ought to do is to really look at the facts. Did the employee in question step over the boundaries? Was it on a personal page, a personal post? Did it infringe another group's the rights of another group? So really lay out the facts and analyze it on a case-by-case basis, rather than rush to judgment and say, if we don't do that, we're going to lose a business in China, and therefore let's go with this decision or that decision.
Not to take the path of least resistance,
Yeah.
is what you're basically saying.
Yeah.
Now, the bank in your question was, of course, one of the largest banks in the world, and it has the resources to have that kind of a situation, and yet it did not do. So if you're a smaller organization, it becomes even harder for a company to do that. So how do we, I feel that at one level, it would be fine if somebody were to take a view which may be controversial but does not infringe on somebody's rights. But it should be allowed to have the full latitude. But companies also have responsibility to their shareholders.
Yeah.
How do they perform the balancing act?
I think for smaller companies,
Yeah.
it is both a disadvantage in that it lacks resources to have the committee that we talked about earlier, but it also has the advantage of having closer employee-employee relationship. So in the case of a smaller organization, my advice is to really engage in an active dialogue and communication to the employee in question. Find out what was behind the comment and maybe work with the employee to issue a clarification or something that would de-escalate the situation. That's not something that a huge organization can necessarily happen, but for a smaller organization, I think it's doable.
With hindsight, would you have done anything differently?
No, I stand by freedom of expression. I stand by my post. As you know, I was the president of PEN Hong Kong. PEN Hong Kong mission is to defend freedom of expression, so that is something I hold very dear and near to my heart, and I stand by everything I've done in the past.
And going forward, is there some kind of, do you see some kind of a role for organizations to play in this kind of a regard? Or do you think free speech activists should take it more seriously? Because typically the free speech discourse tends to deal with what the state does and what it impacts on individual. But increasingly, some of the biggest players are the Facebooks and the Googles and the YouTubes of the world. They control the airwaves. They control what we talk. What kind of a framework can we have? We are talking about international law? Are we talking about domestic legislation?
Right. I think legislation is going to always lag behind the private sector. I think the best thing is for private sector to start taking the social media matter very seriously. A lot of companies have chief information officers that looks after IT, chief diversity officer to look after matters relating to diversity and racism and whatnot, why not have a chief social media officer or chief conduct officer that really looks into these matters and focus and sort of have a protocol to deal with this kind of situation rather than sort of reacting in a knee-jerk manner.
And the protocol should be driven by human rights principles, of course.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Because it would be so easy to take the path of least resistance.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, completely agree.
I know you're very busy with things that are happening in Hong Kong. Any projections or predictions? What should a company do today? Forget about the free speech issue. What should a company do in Hong Kong, both in the context of the protest, and the related question is, what should they do in the context of coronavirus? What should they do in protecting the rights of their employees and customers and everybody? Yeah.
Well, my heart does go out to all the companies in Hong Kong because it really looks like they are not getting a break. I mean, if first it was the interruption of one of the largest and the longest lasting political upheaval we have seen since the handover, and now we have the coronavirus that really paralyzed the entire city. Nobody is leaving their apartments to go to the streets or the malls. So it is a very dire situation, if you will. My advice to company in terms of the protest movement more specifically would be, I think this is sort of a once in a lifetime moment for Hong Kong. Hong Kong people are doing the right thing by defending the freedom of expression, defending the freedoms that are guaranteed in the Constitution. They're not asking for anything more. They're merely asking to defend and protect what they already have. Support them. If the conflict of interest for fear of upsetting your mainland Chinese clients that you don't want to support them, at least don't get in the way.
Right.
At least let them be a little bit more understanding if the employee takes a sick leave, knowing that maybe they were out on the streets protesting. Just be a little understanding, and that little bit of understanding goes a very long way.
Thank you very much and all the very best. I know it's a very tough road ahead for you, but wish you all the best. Yeah.
Thank you so much.